The Knicks just closed out that Game 6 victory against the Boston Celtics last night to take that series, and the Pacers beat the Cavs in 5 in an unexpected result there as well. Two big upsets, two teams no one expected to be in the conference finals, unless you're me and you predicted the Pacers to be really good, but that's beside the point. This Eastern Conference Finals is going to be crazy, and here's my 3 big questions for it. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Court Vision. Like I said, in today's video, I'm going to give you my 3 biggest questions for the Knicks versus Pacers Eastern Conference Finals. Without further ado, let's get into it. My first question for this series is, can the Knicks stay out of rotation and in the half court defensively, right? The Pacers offense loves to get to 2 things. They want to get your defense in rotation, and they want to push in transition. They rely on, ball movement, generating those paint touches, collapsing the defense in the half court to get your guys in rotation. And then they also have one of the highest paces in the league, that's driven by their psychotic, pace-pushing ball handlers like Tyrese Halliburton, like Andrew Nembhard. They rank at the top of basically every passing-based stat and every transition stat. And, we know this, and so do the Knicks. So let's talk about how the Knicks can maybe respond to that. Let's talk about staying out of rotation. In round 2 against Boston, one of the big points defensively, scheme-wise for the Knicks, was switching those screen actions with their bigs on the perimeter. They would concede those switches and giving those mismatches up in order to stay out of rotation defensively, which was keeping the Celtics from generating a ton of open 3-point looks, against that rotating defense, and that made the Celtics rely a lot more on ISO scoring or, pull-up shooting to generate offense. And the question is, can the Knicks get away with doing the same thing against the Pacers? If they can get away with switching these actions and prevent the Pacers from getting them into rotation as much, will that be a big key for limiting Indiana's offense? Indiana is one of the lowest frequency ISO teams, and their scoring on these isolation possessions is only 0.88 points per possession in this postseason, which is one of the lowest out of every team in the postseason. But on the other hand, if conceding those switches doesn't have the intended result, does it let, Tyrese Halliburton, Andrew Nembhard, Pascal Siakam get more paint touches to drive the offense, driving on those mismatches? For example, if, Miles Turner screens for Halliburton, Halliburton gets the switch onto Karl Anthony Towns or onto Mitchell Robinson, and is he able to attack that mismatch and generate that paint touch to initiate their ball movement? We'll have to see. If the Knicks are able to get away with it, though, switching it and limit the Pacers' ball movement, then how do the Pacers respond to that? Do we get to see more post touches from Pascal Siakam, even if he's had, a kind of quiet postseason offensively? Do they try to attack Brunson and Karl Anthony Towns in like a 2-man game or a pick and roll with Andrew Nembhard and Miles Turner? Do they hunt those switches on isolation and just try to punish them straight up to kind of encourage the Knicks to stop switching? We'll have to see how it plays out. My second big question is, how are the Pacers going to deal with New York's double big lineup? The double big lineup with Karl Anthony Towns and Mitchell Robinson on the floor together will be a huge problem for Indiana because they're not a huge team size-wise, nor are they a great rebounding team. The Knicks with the double big on the floor have an offensive rebound percentage of 40, which is a ridiculous number in this postseason. And then in that same stretch, the Pacers give up an offensive rebound percentage of 28%, which is 10th of the 16 postseason teams. The Knicks are going to be a problem on the offensive glass in these lineups. And then Indiana doesn't really have a great answer other than, gang rebounding, emphasizing the box outs, things like that. The double big also presents another challenge for Indiana to solve in the half court defensively. Having 2 lob threats, 2 guys who are screeners and rollers on the floor at the same time, playing in pick and roll with Brunson or Mikal Bridges, or playing off of Jalen Brunson on his isolation possessions, will kind of force tough choices for Indiana's interior defenders, having to either step up to the primary action or worry about, Mitch in the dunker spot or Cat in the dunker spot or things like this. Matchup wise, Pascal on one of the bigs with Miles Turner or Thomas Bryant on the other is the thing that you would probably expect them to go to. But this might be a problem defensively because if Cat feels comfortable attacking the Pascal Siakam matchup, then that creates a lot of challenges in terms of the matchups because Indiana doesn't really play a double big of their own for offensive reasons. Their spacing. The Pacers can certainly try, hacking Mitchell Robinson to try and dare Tom Thibodeau to take him off the floor. But when the Celtics did that, the Knicks didn't really seem to care too much, and they'll likely be more ready for that to happen with their prep in this series. So for me, the way that Indiana can solve the double big is actually on their own offensive end. They have to make the double big a defensive liability for New York, which seems a little counterintuitive because normally you associate the double big with better defense. The pace that Indiana plays with, their 5-out spacing, and their movement in the half court will be keys to kind of force Karl Anthony Towns and Mitchell Robinson to guard outside and be involved in a lot of actions, back to back to back, and then hopefully make their slow-footedness kind of a liability. Pushing pace in transition to force them to get back and either tire them out, making them run, or beating them back for easy transition points. You want to put them in screens and force them to move on the perimeter, even if they switch those actions, and using your 5-out spacing to punish any space that or help that the bigs might show for New York. Another good way that the Pacers can try and deal with it is just getting one of them or both of them in foul trouble. Mitch and Cat, especially Cat, are known to get in foul trouble often, and it's the simplest way to get them off of the floor. You can attack them in action, drive into them if you get that switch, attack that switch, get to the rim to try and get a foul there, draw that contact, right? You can have Pascal attacking Cat in the post. You can have those screen actions with Miles Turner or Pascal screening. These are kind of good ways that the Pacers can draw those fouls and hopefully get them off the floor. Third and final question for this series is, how will the Knicks continue to get Karl Anthony Towns more involved offensively? It's a common sentiment that I've seen a lot from like analysts or other, content creators that Cat isn't being utilized enough or being utilized properly offensively by the Knicks, and I agree a lot with that. I don't think that he's been maximized at all in the way that he's used offensively in the postseason. In Game 6 against Boston, he was much more aggressive and took a lot more shots, which was good, but a lot of the shots he was taking in that game were either driving from the perimeter one-on-one or pulling up in transition for threes. These are shots that aren't necessarily drawn up for him, which is what I want to see more of. The number one thing is he just needs to be shooting more threes, right? He's arguably the best big shooting big of all time, and he only took about 3 threes a game in round 2 against Boston, which just isn't enough in my opinion. They use him sometimes as a pick and pop threat, which is good, but that's kind of where the threes drawn up for Cat end. They don't really run a ton of inverted pick and roll for him. They don't set him high screens so he can get into his pull-up. They don't lift him off pin downs for catch and shoots. They don't do anything like this very often. So I'd like to see, something like that from the Knicks in this series. I also don't think Cat is used enough as a screener or involved in primary actions enough. One stat that I was looking at during my research for this video that was crazy to me is that after 12 postseason games, he still hasn't been used enough as the roll man and pick and roll to get over the threshold for the play type data. The threshold is 10 possessions, right? So he hasn't been used more than 10 times according to the NBA's play type data as the roll man in pick and roll, which is ridiculous, right? Over 12 postseason games, it's ridiculous that he hasn't been used in that many times. In the regular season as a roll man, he had 1.25 points per possession, which is really, really good. So using him as a pick and roll partner is just an easy way to get him more involved offensively because he can be that pick and pop threat. He's a fairly capable short roll playmaker, and he's straight up just a talented scorer on the roll. Him playing in that pick and roll off of Jalen Brunson will create so much chaos for a defense because, no matter how you choose to play the coverage defensively, one of Cat or Brunson will get a good shot. So I just want to see him used in that way more often as well. As I said before, the Pacers aren't also very big size-wise, and Cat loves to post up and attack those mismatches with smaller defenders. So if they can get his post game going against those smaller or less strong defenders it'll open up a lot for him in his offense, but also for other guys. And it makes it harder for the Pacers to get away with putting Miles Turner on Josh Hart. Cat posting up like this could be especially effective in minutes with Miles Turner out of the game, with Pascal Siakam or Thomas Bryant at the 5, who neither of whom are great defensive matchups for Cat, even though Pascal's a great defender. He's just not as big, right? Again, this kind of approach also relies on him staying out of foul trouble. He picks up a lot of early fouls. He was consistently playing with 4 or 5 fouls in crunch time in round 1 against Detroit and in round 2 against Boston, averaging 4.4 fouls a game in the postseason, right? The Knicks are just going to need him on the floor and need him to be involved offensively to keep up with the Pacers. That's all I've got in this one. It's been a real busy week for me. Haven't uploaded in 6 days or whatever. That's my fault. But, just been busy with work, with some other stuff. But we're back, and you'll see a video from me hopefully tomorrow or Sunday giving you my 3 questions for the Western Conference Finals as soon as that series with Denver and OKC wraps up. Game 7 is on Sunday, so hopefully I'll have that done either Sunday night or Monday morning. But yeah, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you want to see more, like the video, and I'll see you in the next one.